Well, hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World. It is now 2023 and time for us to get back to work. To that end, you are watching the first in a three-part series where we're going to walk through the decisioning process on what to do about our broken NSX. For those who haven't been following, last year we attended a track event that was part of NS Expo 2022. Halfway through the event, we heard a noise that sounded like and was later confirmed to be rod knock. You can see those videos elsewhere on the channel. Now though, we are left with a decision of what to do from here. Do we fix the C-Series? Do we replace the motor? Do we do an engine swap? Those are kind of the big options. We're going to discuss all of them and take you along for the ride, starting today in kind of egalitarian alphabetical order with the J Swap. So I'm going to throw it back to Richard from the past, along with our expert guest, David Dowling of Velocity Motorsports, to talk about the J Swap as an option. Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. If you've been following the channel, you know that I've had some recent bout of misfortune with my beloved C-Series motor in my NSX. Still TBD on that story, but we'll bring you updates when we have them. But for now, I felt it was good to be aware of my options, and my passenger here was kind enough to offer to let me drive his J Swapped NSX. So here we are. I'm in the passenger, or rather, I'm behind the wheel of a what otherwise looks like a perfectly normal NSX with a kind of a not quite a Frankenstein, but definitely a little bit of a hybrid J-Series setup, which, if you're not familiar with the J-Series, it's the kind of more normal Honda V6 that you would see. But this is David from
Velocity Motors.
Thank you, Velocity Motors. He just told me this like 30 seconds ago, but this is the mind of a goldfish, you know, it's the YouTubers, what are you going to do with them? But Dave's going to tell us a little bit about, so your expertise is pretty much in J-swapping the NSX as far as product is concerned.
Yeah, I started out, you know, I was in a very similar situation as you, and my C30 started making some noise, and I...
Say it ain't so, and...
Yeah, you know, and it was, but... So I was looking at my options and what else could I put in this car to keep it running or make it move? And it turned out that a first-gen J35 or J-Series motor out of another Honda, would bolt up to my transmission.
It's convenient.
Yeah, so the a J-Series is a 60-degree V6 as opposed to the C motor 90-degree V6. But being 60 degrees, it's a lot easier to do maintenance. The valve adjustments are a lot easier, and the motor is a lot cheaper, so your running costs are lower. And the fact that it bolted up to the transmission meant I didn't have to have custom axles or custom shift linkage, and it was really...
Speedometer still works.
Yeah, speedometer, the tag, all the gauges.
Yeah. That's the one thing I do notice about this. I'll show you a picture of this at some point in time, but there is no, like usually with a lot of swapped cars, you'll see a big Christmas tree across the dash because nothing, you know, plays nicely, but that's not the case here. I'm looking at a pretty normal NSX dash. So, quick driving impressions, because we've been on the road now for a few minutes out of the track. This is directly, I was giving David a hard time. I was like, hey, you vultures are already trying to get me to abandon my C-Series, but
not abandon it.
Not abandon it. Save it. Okay, sure. There we go.
A little bit.
Sure. No, I was kidding him, kidding around with him for a little bit. But we've just left the track, and I've kind of gotten on it on an on-ramp a little bit. Otherwise, kind of driving it within the power band in just kind of in normal street driving, and honestly, in this usage case, you know, not wringing its neck or anything right now, it doesn't feel that different. I think apart from just kind of nominal differences in the setup that David has on the car, like the clutch is a little bit different. But other than that, like just steering, power band, accelerating through the through that area feels fairly similar. But I don't know the whole story. You know the whole story. You've done a lot of you've iterated on this several times now. So where, as far as like, I would say we'll take it from kind of just a performance standpoint, because that's what probably people are more curious about. But compared to a C motor, what are the pros and cons of the J motor from a performance standpoint, at least the way you have it set up?
Yeah, so I would say I have a perfectly stock C motor NSX, also a 91, another one. And every time I get in my C motor NSX, I notice a lack of low end torque. And so I'll stall it a couple times, and then I get used to it and remember, okay, right, I got to rev this one up a little bit. Where the J has got, a different power band. There's a more torque at a lower RPM. So your around town driving tends to be a little easier, a little more forgiving.
Sure.
And then you don't really have a lot of power over 6,500 RPMs. You know, it's not a C motor. It's not going to rev to 8,000 RPMs. But
so what is the actual red line on this? Because I feel like the dash is probably a lie, and I don't want to, not.
So the quoted Acura red line is 6,800 RPMs. Fuel cut on the, I'm still running the stock J32 Type S ECU from an automatic transmission that I've done a lot of work to get all those bugs out, to make sure the dash doesn't light up. And I wanted it to run as stock as possible, just as if Honda had put it in here. Missions are connected, things like that. So fuel cut is at 7,200 RPMs.
Sure. Okay, well that's so you're losing a little bit on top end, but you're gaining some on the bottom end, which from a daily drivability, I would say that would definitely be a boon. And honestly, depending on the, I guess especially with the, I don't know, does this car have the stock? Is this a USDM stock gearbox, or does this have
stock USDM 5-speed?
Okay.
Stock final drive ratio, everything.
So yeah, I have noticed probably the torque difference is noticeable. Just having done a couple of little kind of hold back and accelerate cycles, but that is noticeable. So that would be probably a boon around town, and then depending on the track you are on, could honestly be beneficial there too, because there have definitely been several tracks that I've been to where I find myself in between gears with the C series in order to keep it in the power band. And granted, you have that that big RPM range you have to work with. However, that can, as I have now discovered to my detriment, stress things out in certain situations, although it is fairly robust.
Yeah.
So I think, honestly, this has been a pretty interesting experience here, and first swapped anything NSX that I've driven, and I'm it's pleasantly surprised to feel how kind of normal it feels compared to a stock NSX or completely unmolested NSX. So this is where I have to acknowledge that I suck at camera a little bit, and somewhere between Phoenix and Knoxville, I have lost the second half of the conversation we had in the car. Fortunately, this was kind of the point where we transitioned into talking more nuts, bolts, and dollar figures. So it was not too hard to reached out to David on the internet, and we reconstructed this part of the conversation, which may honestly be easier to present to you off of a sheet of paper than kind of ad hoc in the car, even though David is very good with facts and figures off the top of his head. So I'm going to apologize in advance for reading a little bit so we can get through this in a timely fashion. But let's say for now that we're entertaining for serious the thought of a J swap to replace, at least for now, a C-Series engine in our NSX. What would executing that plan look like? Well, the first thing you need to do is find out which J motors actually bolt straight up to the NSX driveline. And Dave has a list of those on the Facebook page for Velocity Motors. It's NSX J Swap is how you find them on Facebook. And it's, as far as I can tell, the best source of information right now. I've left links in the description to that, as well as his build thread on the NSX Prime forum that has a lot of detail in it as well. But the short end of this is that there are a bunch of J-Series motors that are compatible, ranging from J30s, J32s, and J35s between 1997 and 2007. For the sake of expediency, we're going to kind of cut to the chase and get to the ones that you want, which are either the J32A2 from the early 2000s TL and CL Type S, or the J35A3, which could be found in an MDX, among other things. The Js are a little bit like Lego sets, so there can be some parts mixed and matched to kind of find an optimal solution. So like the J35A1 has the strongest rods, the J32A2 has best cams. For instance, in Dave's current setup, he has a J35A3 block crank and throttle body with a J32A2 intake manifold, cams, pistons, and rods, with a mix of kind of Honda Acura OEM style rings, bearings, and gaskets, and oil pump, as well as some quality aftermarket parts to fill in any gaps. To get started though, let's talk about 3 points here. There's some stuff you're going to keep from your NSX. There's stuff that you're going to need from Dave with his kit, and then there's some stuff you're going to need on the side. It's kind of in addition to those. So obviously you're going to pick out your J motor of choice. But then from your NSX, you're going to keep, as we've kind of mentioned, the transmission axles, intermediate shafts, all the shift cables, all 4 motor and transmission mounts. You're still going to need those in some capacity. You're going to need the oil and radiator fan temperature sending units, as well as the ECT sending unit, the air box and intake tube, and the clutch and flywheel. Again, I'm kind of running through this. I'll have a list up here, and then all the other information you'll be able to find in the description in case I'm moving too quickly for you talking. So that is what you're going to need to keep from your NSX, which again, if you have a running driving NSX, or you had a running driving NSX to start with, you should be good to go there for most of those. Now, with the J series engine that you find, so you're going to go out and get your motor, and you're going to need the matching uncut engine wiring harness and the ECU for that J series of choice. Now, that may seem obvious, but if we're not talking about a crate motor here, that may not be a default. Often braking yards end up cutting the harness in some capacity or another to get it out of the car efficiently. So that is something you may need to source. You're also going to need the AC compressor and the alternator from the applicable J series motor. Any refresh parts, maintenance parts for that engine, depending on where it came from, it may need to be caught up on timing belt services or valve adjustments and things like that. You're going to need fuel hose, a pretty specific item here, a Dakota Digital SGI 5 signal interface, which serves as kind of a tack signal adapter to make the VTEC, make everything play nice with the VTEC engagement. There's more detail on that again on Facebook and in the forum thread. So that's why you need that. You're also going to need the J series, whatever J series ECU. If you're using the J series ECU, it needs to have an FX-01 immobilizer delete installed. And then you also have to tap the J series coolant crossover for the NSX coolant gauge sending unit. So there's a little bit of kind of like, housekeeping work mixed in there with what you're going to need. Now, the kit that you get from Dave, which kind of fills in the rest of the blanks here, it's pretty extensive. You get a motor mount kit to pick up the slack from the stock mounts and make the J series fit. It's apparently a fairly, I hesitate to call this bolt-in, but it's probably as close as you're going to get for any kind of engine swap. You're going to get some headers because of course the header is in from a J series motor that was in the front of an SUV is not going to have the exhaust exit routing that you're going to need for a mid-engine NSX. A complete swap harness. This is in addition to the uncut engine harness. This is the swap harness to make that engine harness play nicely with the body harness on the NSX. You'll need AC coolant, or I'm sorry, the kit comes with AC lines, a coolant hose adapter kit, and an oil line kit to kind of complete the package there. So those are the 3 categories. You've got stuff that you're going to keep from your NSX, stuff that you're going to need to source with your motor, and stuff that you're going to get from Dave with his kit. Now, what's this all going to cost? That's, I think, probably the next question. So everything in the kit, everything in Dave's kit is about $7,000. All in $7,000. Your preferred J motor, just kind of looking around the internet, this can vary widely, but I think probably between $1,000 and $1,500 should get you something. Everything costs more than it used to, etc. Caveat with wherever the used engine market goes. The uncut engine harness, if it doesn't come with your motor, just looking at eBay, that could run up to $500. You could maybe find one for less. Again, if you're lucky, you might be able to go to a junkyard and pull one, depending on how well stocked they are. The ECU is kind of a big swing point. If you're running the solution such as what Dave has on his car, which is basically a factory ECU with a lot of kind of adapting done to it, you could find that ECU and do the work on it for $50. I don't know, what do they charge at pull apart these days for an ECU? Alternatively, if you're going to go and if you're really trying to push the power band of the car up some, and you go with a full standalone setup, that could be $2,000 or more. Not including dyno time for something like an AEM kit. Then you're going to have some maintenance and engine building costs associated with that, which we've kind of speculated could be in the hundreds of dollars if you just need to catch it up on some maintenance and not do much else. Could be $2,500 or more if you decide to actually do a real build to it, have machine work done and things like that. And then finally, I think we're totaling out here about $10,000 to $14,000, just to give you a range. I know that's a big range. I mean, let's be honest, it's probably like narrower than the range that you got from your last building contractor that you worked with, but but it's a range. So that's basically on the bottom end, being you take a J series, do the bare minimum to get it to plug in and work right, and play nicely in an NSX. So you're going to have the original. You're going to have basically like an MDX or TL Type S engine powering your NSX with the factory ECU and no built internals or anything like that. To $14,000 being, you've built it, maybe anticipating throwing boost at it, and you're running a standalone ECU at this point. All right, so that's all the facts and figures. You kind of know what you need and roughly how much it's going to cost. Now, the last question at hand is why? Why would you do a J swap? And we're going to kind of go through this and get a little philosophical, so bear with us for a second. But we're going to go through and hit some pros, cons, and kind of break-even points, what I would call them. Let's start actually with the break-evens, the stuff that you're not going to get, or that doesn't really, it kind of comes out in the wash, right? So you still get a V6 in an NSX. Going to sound about the same. It's going to take up the same in the engine bay. It looks, you've seen the, I'll put a little overlay again here, but it looks right at home in the engine bay. There's nothing weird going on there. So there's that. The J motors, they still use a timing belt, so you still have that maintenance cycle. You're not going to get away from that. You don't get a timing chain going to a J series that's going to give you a much longer maintenance cycle on that, on the timing. They're still also transversely mounted, so you're also not escaping the boogeyman of oil slosh with track use. You're still going to have to find preventative measures for that. And then lastly, depending on what and how badly something has gone wrong with your C-Series engine, it may or may not be any cheaper in initial cost to do a J swap versus fixing or replacing the C-Series. I say initial cost because, again, the value proposition with the J is in the long run. You fix and replace your C-Series, you blow it up again, you're in the same boat, you're spending the same amount of money. You put a J swap in the car, you blow that up, you pull another one out of the pick and pull and stick it in the car, you're out another $2,000, with probably a little bit of work done to it, because assuming not all the parts are going to be lost. You throw a rod through the block, you go get another block. You can't, how long are you going to be able to even do that with a C motor? Who knows? So those are kind of the break-evens. So let's move back up here to some pros. Why would you what are the motivating factors for doing a J swap? Well, the J's are, again, they're cheaper and more readily available than the C-Series engines. The maintenance parts are also cheaper and more readily available. It's going to be a long, long time before you run into a part shortage for J-Series engines because they're still making them, and some of these parts will update, backdate, and you can kind of mix and match between so many different cars because of that kind of modularity of them that you're going to be able to find parts for these until nearly the end of time. Certainly, I would be able to find parts for them until the point that I'm no longer concerned about finding parts for a internal combustion engine. But and then so moving on from that point though, it does still use the J Swap, and this is kind of as an opposed to other swap options. Pro is that it still uses the NSX drivetrain, transmission and downstream, which is super robust and also kind of takes out a big chunk or a big area that contains a lot of opportunity for failure when you're doing something as involved as an engine swap. At least in this case, you don't have to worry about the transmission and anything downstream of that, because it was engineered by Honda in the 90s, which engineered a lot of really good stuff. So that's probably good to go. Now, it does have, performance-wise, it has better low-end torque, and I'm talking stock for stock here. Obviously, if you build either one of these motors, you're going to get different results, or boost either one of them for that matter. You can supercharge an NSX, you're going to have way more torque than you would from a J series, left NA, so on and so forth. But stock for stock, the J has better low-end torque than the C series. So your around town driving experience, as we discussed in the video, it's probably going to be a little more friendly. It also weighs a little bit less. The J has I think this is mainly in the heads because they're single overhead cam instead of double overhead cam. So you're losing a camshaft and the associated mass. But they're about 65 pounds less. And then lastly, the 60-degree V in the J series motors, they're going to have less natural resonance and vibration than the 90-degree in the C series motor, although that hasn't seemed to be an issue for the C series as far as longevity. So do with that information what you will. But those are kind of most of the pros there. Again, the biggest ones are the long-term cost savings and parts availability, kind of the continuity, vehicular continuity, I guess, of the situation that you end up in. As for compromises, we're going to call them, stock for stock, again, built motors out of the question here, but stock for stock, the J's are not quite as robust as the C series motors. The C uses a 6-bolt main cap, the J uses a 4-bolt main. The C was definitely engineered with motorsports in mind and long-term durability. The J is a little bit more mass production. That said, the J architecture has been thoroughly proven, and so it's not like they're acutely fragile. Real-time racing has sent them up Pikes Peak with loads of boost getting thrown through them. So you can do big stuff with the J series motor, but stock for stock, probably not quite as robust. You also lose a little bit of RPM range and, again, peak horsepower. Now, the J makes up for the lack of peak horsepower with more torque and an earlier VTEC engagement in that rev range, but in absolute terms, if you put them on paper with equal exhausts, I should say, the C motor is going to be a little spicier in absolute terms. The other compromise I've put on here is kind of the X factor inherent with going off script with any kind of engine swap, and this is really broadly applicable to any swap. You are putting components together in a car that were not originally engineered to work together. Again, Honda engineers in the 90s, I think it would be pretty broadly applicable to say they knew what they were doing. They were winning at Formula One. They built the original NSX, which is a ridiculous legacy, and then they went on to do other good things as well. They really knew what they were doing, and they had all of the resources and money available to them through Honda Motor Company. So to assume that one could do the same in your garage is probably a bit on the airs towards the side of hubris there. But so there's always going to be a little bit of fiddling, and the potential for shenanigans always exists with that. And that's more in the process than the result, but I think it's still something to bear in mind. The last thing here is running the stock ECU. So like the way that Dave has his car set up with running that stock ECU, pretty sure he said that he would even pass emissions if it came to it. I don't think where he has tests, but and Tennessee doesn't either. We don't give a crap. But I care about the environment. I run catalytic converters on all my cars, but I could probably get a freaking NASCAR engine through the registration process here pretty easily. Running the stock ECU, you do end up with, again, kind of going back to that, like the amount of money and resources available to test and tune a factory ECU is huge. And that's probably one of the biggest tasks that they do in car development, is getting that electronic envelope of performance right. So you can drive the car from, you could do a track day at Pikes Peak and then drive down to the lowest altitude track in the world at the Thermal Club and do another track day, and everything's going to work. If, on the other hand, you decide to opt for a standalone ECU to really kind of push the performance envelope of the J series that you swap into the car, you have to remember again that you're going to have to tune that. And whatever tune you put on it is never going to be as robust as a factory ECU tune. The amount of money and resources that the engineers had to fly the car all over the world and test it in all conditions and calibrate everything, and nearly had effectively unlimited dyno time, as well as an entire engineering team behind them to do it. You're never going to get there with a standalone ECU, even with the best tuner in the world. It's going to be good in some situations. You'll be able to make it real fast on a track. You'll be able to make it work okay around town. But it's those weird variables that you could occasionally run into that I'm kind of forced to consider. I'm forced to consider considering what we do on the channel. But that's where we're going to leave it. I'm out of notes. That is a J Swap in a nutshell. We hope you found the video informative, if not entertaining, and we would love to hear your opinions. Please leave comments down below if we've missed anything in our, misquoted some J series trivia, have any pros or cons that we missed, have any ideas or thoughts about other options. This is not the last video we're going to make in the series, so I know what everybody's going to say. I know what the most common comment's going to be, and that video's next as we go down the alphabet in our options for the NSX, if you know what I mean. But barring that, I would love to hear any input. We're always, I always learn something from the comment section because you guys are awesome, and we'd always appreciate your input, and I love reading them. So leave that down below. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. If you want to see what if you want to follow along with this series, then don't forget to subscribe if you aren't already, because we're going to be again talking about some other options, and then eventually making a decision before reconstituting the NSX in some manner or another and getting back out in the world to check other tracks off of our list. So with that said, and with that end goal in mind, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again for watching. I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World. We'll see you all in the next video, if not at the track.